Welcome everyone, welcome to Deep at Night video edition. Today we are going over Destruction Warlock. Why? Because we went over the melee flavor of the month spec in survival, so now it's time to go over the ranged DPS flavor of the month. The debate was between Demo and Destro as flavor of the month, but you know what? Demonology already was meta in 9.1, already was the better Warlock spec and one of the more better performing ranged spec anyways. Meanwhile, Destruction was not. Destruction has been more or less garbage the entire expansion. They were never even close to their old days of BFA, of Nyalotha power, of Destro. But this tier they are getting quite close to that level. So we are going over Destruction to everyone who perhaps starts looking into playing some alts, eyeing some of their unplayed characters now that the content is getting a little bit more stale on your main. Perhaps you're starting to look into some more new things to play, and who knows, perhaps for once you want to play a flavor of the month spec. You don't want to get declined from plus 11 keys because they are looking for the perfect comp that they saw in an MDI stream. So this time you want to play a popular spec, and definitely Destruction is one of them. So let's start by looking at how Destruction works. First of all, Destruction works very simply. Destruction, let's just lay it out there. Destruction is not a complicated spec. There is not too much min-maxing and buffs and debuffs and timings you need to take care of when you play Destruction. Is quite straightforward of a spec. When you're fighting in single target, you are putting Immolate on the target, you are casting Incinerate as your filler ability, you use Conflagrate when it's available, and then you dump your shards with Chaos Bolt. One debuff to keep up, very simple, Immolate is not that complicated, and then 3 main abilities. If you move over to AOE situations, it's the exact same, except you are replacing Chaos Bolt with Rain of Fire. That's really it. In fact, as you will see in Mythic Plus, it will actually become even simpler than this, even more straightforward than this setup for Destruction. So, just like we went for survival when we talk about it, Destruction 2 has been somewhat monopolized by the power of their tier set. Now they want to go for the same build regardless of PvE, single target, AoE, cleave. It's pretty much mostly the same talent setup. So they don't get much variety in that sense. Destruction is going to play pretty much always in the first row with Eradication. This is because of the power of your Chaos Bolt, it's because of the power of your rotation, trying to dump many Chaos Bolts in the same window, and also because of the tier set, which we will see soon. In the second row, it's again, as mostly as usual, Reverse Entropy for the free haste procs for Destruction. For AoE, you always use Inferno. If you're fighting a boss that has literally 0 AoE, then you play Cataclysm. And then the last 2 talents are also always the same. It's always Reign of Chaos and it's always Soul Conduit. Reign of Chaos to spawn extra Infernals and Soul Conduits to give you more shards back, so you can spend more shards, so you have more chances to spawn more Infernals. The only debatable option for Warlock in the entire talent tree besides Cataclysm is Dark Pact or Burning Rush. So defensive or mobility is the other choice in the tree. Everything else regarding damage stays pretty much the same. The reason why this is staying the same: enter the Warlock Destruction tier set for 9.2. So the 2-piece is going to give you a free to cast Rain of Fire or Chaos Bolt when you spend 10 soul shards. And the 4-piece set bonus makes it so that when you are casting, when you're spending that 2-piece set bonus buff with a free Chaos Bolt or a free Rain of Fire, you're also spawning a Blasphemy for 8 seconds. A Blasphemy is basically a purple Infernal. It does the same thing, it does the same damage, it has the same passive soul shard generation, it's just a different mob. That's just about it. So, as you might have seen already, this entire setup of Destruction has its strength laying in AoE. The reason was because now it's not as strong because it's been nerfed, but it was because of the uncappedness of Inferno. The talent that gave your Rain of Fire a chance to generate a soul shard every time it hit an enemy. In case you don't know, Destruction's Rain of Fire can be cast multiple times on top of itself. Sort of like how you can cast multiple times Earthquake of an Elemental Shaman on top of itself. So casting multiple Rain of Fires on top of each other were giving you chances to generate tons of soul shards when you were hitting many enemies in large Mythic Plus pools. So Inferno allowed you to generate tons of shards, which works very well with your tier set. That gives you a free cast of a spender. Also, every time you're spending all of these shards for free, you're also spawning blasphemies. At the same time, Soul Conduits is giving you a chance to refund your soul shards, so you gain even more shards to spend, and all the while you're spending all of these and all the while you're spending all of these charges, proccing your tier sets, you're also spawning more Infernos because of Reign of Chaos. This created a degenerate gameplay in Mythic Plus that looked like this. You get ready by proccing your cooldowns, your Trinket, your Racial, your Infernal and whatnot, and then you just spam Rain of Fire, because you are generating so many soul shards that you don't need to do anything else. Just keep laying down the Rain of Fire carpet bombing forever. That is the playstyle in Mythic Plus of a Destruction Warlock. And that is why I said it is quite straightforward and quite simple. Even if it is a flavor of the month spec and whatnot, it is not that complicated to pull off the AoE of Destruction in Mythic Plus. And this power, this AoE power, obviously is not as powerful in single target. Obviously Destruction is much weaker when it comes to just one target. As you can see here, this is a fight like Skolex, which is purely one target, or even Halondrus, which is also purely one target, and Destruction is definitely not doing well. Luckily for you, those are the only two fights, together with the Jailer, where pretty much you're gonna be having one target for most of the fight. All of the other fights are going to have two or more targets or situations with AoE, heavy AoE coming in. You can see, for example, Dosen. Dosen has one target extra spawning every once in a while, which is perfect for your Havoc. This is why Destruction is doing so well on Dosen. And then you have plenty of AoE instances on fights like Lihovim, fights like Zymox, like Anduin, are all pretty thick full of AoE. You have Lords of Dread, which has two permanent targets, which is also good for your Havoc as a Destruction Warlock. And then you have Rygelon, which has constantly small little adds spawning, and you can also use that to do very well as Destruction. So even though your single target is not as powerful, there is actually still a point, a reason to bring a Destruction Warlock in a raid. Perhaps not as much as a Demonology Warlock, but that is the type of first world problem I would like to have if I were a pure DPS class. So even though the raid situation is certainly not weak, as a matter of fact they are the better performing spec right now in the raid, they are definitely more of a standout pick in Mythic Plus, because that's where the AoE comes into play much more. It is much more important, so Destruction gets to shine even more. But what they are also strong in Mythic Plus is also the amount of utility they can bring to the group. Because Destruction has some of the typical abilities like Fear that can be used also to interrupt casts and whatnot. They have Shadow Fury, which is an AoE stun, which is also quite good. They have Mortal Coil, which is also another type of CC ability that they can use. They can choose their pets. They can have the Felguard for the single target stun. They can have the Silence, or they can even have the Dispel, which can become super powerful in fights like Koltarok. That gets very nasty. For example, in Tyrannical, a Destruction Warlock or a Warlock in general can trivialize the encounter, as well as more niche things, but still not weak, like Curse of Tongues, slowing down the cast speed, or Curse of Weakness, slowing down the attack speed of bosses in particular, or even Banish, which can work as a CC as well. And this is all without mentioning the Soulstone, Combat Res, and the Hellstone that they can give to the party. So they do have quite a lot of utility that they can bring. They have a ton of AoE, massive amount of AoE as we have seen already, but also they are very, very defensive. This is also another very powerful plus in Mythic Plus, because when you start getting into high keys of Mythic Plus, things start nearly one-shotting you. Sometimes they can't even be avoided. Sometimes it's an enraged guy throwing axes or throwing spears. It's not even an interruptible cast, it's just gonna chunk you for 75k damage. So we went over how survival was squishy and fragile and very liable to dying. Destruction is quite the opposite. Warlock as a whole is quite the opposite, because it is quite tanky. as a class. They do have some innate tankiness thanks to Soul Leech as an absorb shield on themselves, and their mastery, Chaotic Energies, which also reduces the damage they take. On top of this, they have their two defensives. Unending Resolve, which is the standard damage reduction type defensive, but more importantly, they have Dark Pact. I dare say, should I say this? Should I go out and say it? Dark Pact is the strongest defensive in the game for any DPS in Mythic Plus. This ability on a 1 minute cooldown can absorb 60,000 damage. 60,000 with a 20% DR, with a 20% damage reduction cooldown on a 1 minute cooldown, like Barkskin for example, you would have to be taking 300,000 damage to be able to reduce 60,000 of it. And that's what Dark Pact can do on a 1 minute cooldown. And remember, the season is encrypted. You get the relic, which can further reduce the cooldown of this Dark Pact ability, making you even tankier. This is very, very strong for surviving heavy hits in Mythic Plus, whether it's a fortified heavy hit from a trash mob or a tyrannical heavy hit from a boss. This is very, very powerful, which is what makes them very good in Mythic Plus. Of course, I already mentioned the innate value of Hellstones as an example, which overall makes them a very safe DPS spec, particularly if you're a healer and you have to try to heal them. They are definitely much more smooth to try to heal than, say, a hunter. As far as diversity goes, we pointed out that their talents are not changing too much, and their covenant also doesn't change too much because it's Nightfall. The only slight minor changes are going to be when you move over to Kyrian, primarily for certain bosses where enough enemies die one after the other so that they can make your Scoring Tithe and your Covenant Legendary of Kyrian valuable. The best example for this is Rigelon, because of all the small little quasars that keep dying. It gives very good value to your Languishing Soul Detritus Legendary of Kyrian. But that's the only niche hipster option. Outside of that, most of the other options are going to be Nightfall. Nightfall gives you the Cane Soul Satchel. It gives you, in Mythic Plus especially, 20% crit and haste whenever you activate it. So it's good burst. It's good burst for you as a Destro lock. The only other change is in your Legendary. Being that the Covenant option is of course locking your Legendary choice, the other choice is between Wilfred's Sigil and Madness of the Ajakir. Those are the two main options. Wilfred's Sigil is what is used the most often, is what pretty much will always be used in Mythic Plus, and a few times as well in Red Encounters. The general idea in Red Encounters is that the more damage you can do with Chaos Bolt, the more single target or two target damage with Havoc you can do with Chaos Bolt, the more times you will be playing with Madness of the Ajakir because of your Chaos Bolt damage. The more you use Rain of Fire, the more there are AoE situations in the fight, the more you will be playing with Wilfred's Sigil. Wilfred's Sigil is very important and very powerful to your setup because of how it extends the duration of your Infernal. You know, between Reign of Chaos, which can further extend Infernals by spawning more of them, and the Relic in Mythic Plus reducing its cooldown, and the Wilfred's Legendary reducing its cooldown even more, you can see that in this key, which lasted 32 minutes, on a 3-minute cooldown you were expecting 10 or so Infernal casts. These are 19 Infernals in 32 minutes. This is like a 1 minute 15 second cooldown Infernal, not a 3-minute cooldown Infernal. And this is how long the Infernal stays active. This is the damage of the Infernal throughout a half an hour missed key, and you can see that its uptime is 80% of the time. And the green segments, of course, the green segments in that key are the Reign of Chaos being active, so the extra Infernals being spawned by the talent. So this legendary Wilfred's Sigil is very, very powerful, and of course, because it is empowered by spending Soul Shards, guess what? The Mythic Plus build around Rain of Fire, tons of Soul Shards generation, and then spending them with more and more and more Rain of Fires is very, very powerful for this legendary. In Red Encounters, it's not as much. In Red Encounters, there's not as many targets you can cheese with the Rain of Fire hits, which makes it not as powerful. Chaos Bolt is much more key in Red Encounters, which makes it better for you to play with a Chaos Bolt focused legendary like Madness of the Ajakir. Those are pretty much the main choices of a Warlock. The talent setup, as we said, stays mostly the same. The legendary options are more or less depending if it's AoE focused or single target focused, and the Covenant choice is Night Fae, except in a couple of very small cases it can be Kyrian. Your setup of choice for your gear is going to be Haste. As a caster, you enjoy Haste, you enjoy your GCD being reduced and casting faster, and also unused trinkets. This is a standard choice for specs that have good burst windows, good burst cooldowns. They can essentially make those windows even stronger with trinkets. So Warlock, much like many other casters, are looking for the Inscrutable Quantum device or the Soul-Letting Ruby or the First Sigil trinkets as powerful unused trinkets for them. So as I said, the setup of Destruction is not too complicated. It is actually quite simple if you were looking at getting into it. It is not that difficult to get going as a Warlock Destruction in Mythic Plus in particular. Of course, as I said, because they have so much utility, it is also going to be quite tricky to reach the skill ceiling of Destruction, knowing when and how to use things like Mortal Coil, to use things like Shadow Fury, AoE Stun, to use your own Dark Pact as a defensive, to use your Fear, your Banish, and all these tiny little things you can bring. Even things like Demonic Circle for movement or your own Gateway for movement are things that you can min-max in Mythic Plus. Perhaps that's why the rotation in Mythic Plus is so simple, because they want you to focus more on the utility, which is likely not what's happening, because given the amount of Flavor of the Month rerollers I have seen playing Destro, not many of them care about much of anything else other than clicking Rain of Fire. I don't see them utilizing their toolkit to their strongest in Mythic Plus, so it is very powerful right now. It is very simple to get into in Mythic Plus and still not very complicated at all in red encounters, even in their single target rotation. So if you were curious or interested about picking up this Flavor of the Month spec, it's definitely a pretty low barrier of entry type of spec to get going as a DPS. For now, for today, or rather for tonight, we are done with our specs. After this, I guess it's time to go back to another melee DPS spec after survival. I will see and take a look around at which spec to go over after. But with this being done, we can take a break. Thank you guys, of course, for watching the video and for helping to contribute to the growth of the channel. You can do more by liking and commenting on the video below, as well as subscribing to the channel. But for today only, as a round of applause for everyone who did not follow the Flavor of the Month meta, everyone who did not roll already a Destruction Warlock can subscribe to the channel. Thank you guys again, see you guys soon, and in the meantime, okay, fine, we are in that time of the season where it's hot in the morning, but then by the time it's near evening I have to change my wardrobe because it starts getting cold. So annoying.